So I finally got around to playing Citizen Sleeper, a game that was brought to my attention because, well, a couple of years ago, I played probably the most important game in my lifetime, Disco Elysium. Now, look, enough's been said about that game. I don't want to touch on it any more than that. I mean, neither of us want this to turn into a 3-hour video essay, but safe to say, it is one of my favorite games ever, and I have been on a desperate, rabid hunt for something even remotely similar ever since. Citizen Sleeper was one of the few titles that other fans did suggest to me as somewhat resembling that experience. So obviously, naturally, that piqued my interest a lot. And with the release of a sequel now upon us, I thought, what a perfect time to finally go back and give this a go. And safe to say, while nothing will obviously ever really compare or come close to Disco, a true video game event, Citizen Sleeper comes closer than anything I've ever played so far. And that's about as high praise as I can give. It's a true indie offering developed by Jump Over the Age, a mostly one-man team helmed by the effortlessly talented Gareth Damian Martin, and published by a similarly small-time outfit, Fellow Traveller. This is, of course, The Patient Gamer, where we go back and play games that are at least a year old to help you battle your back catalogue one title at a time. If there is a game that has been sitting on your backlog for quite a while now and you'd like to find out whether it's worth giving a go or leaving on the shelf, let me know in the comments, and it could be the next game we review here. And if you are new to the channel, well, welcome. I hope you enjoy the video, and if you do and want to see more content like this, then please give us a like and subscribe. I'm a small channel, so every little bit counts. But right now, it's time to ask the question, how does it play today? Citizen Sleeper takes place on Erland's Eye, an independent Halo-like space station that was once under the ownership of the collapsed corporate empire Solheim. It now finds itself as somewhat of a safe haven for the outcasts of the universe, those trying to eke out some sort of existence away from the watchful eye of galactic capitalists. You are chief among them. You are a sleeper, an android with a form of emulated consciousness that's been carried over from a previous physical body that's now been sold to one of the biggest mega corporations in the universe. This means that you are essentially on one of the lowest rungs of the social ladder, looked down on by pretty much everyone for committing what many see as the ultimate betrayal against the self. And it places you in an immediately lonely and isolating odyssey. It's funny because throughout this game, there isn't actually much of an overarching plotline or main quest, and I really liked this. I kept waiting for my character, to get swept up in the typical apocalyptic series of events to save the world, but you're just a sleeper, man. A lost soul on the fringes of space who's haunted by a past they can't remember, trying to find a life worth living. Like growing mushrooms, I'm not joking, is one of the most exciting things you can do in this game. And I mean that in the best way possible. We need so many more games like this, I think, that focus on some of those smaller stories. Now, this, of course, all changes once you get to the DLC, which I'll touch on later, but until then, you're just taking things one cycle at a time. And that brings us to the core gameplay loop here. Essentially, each cycle, which is the equivalent to one day, you're given a limited number of dice to use to achieve goals or to replenish certain meters tied to your survival and well-being, which are represented by condition, which is your health, and energy, which is similar to hunger. Now, your condition is going to determine how many dice you get to play with each cycle, and your energy determines how much condition you lose each cycle, with both of those meters going down somewhat whenever you go to sleep at the end of the day. Now, instead of actually rolling a pair of die like you would in a typical CRPG, you're given a handful of preset numbers at the start of each cycle to use however you like, really, depending on what you want or need and how difficult the checks are for you to pass and how much you want to secure your success. Now, time is a real thing in this game. There is a time management mechanic, and it's a fun novelty, at least in the beginning. Deciding what to do each cycle based on how you prioritize your tasks and how quickly they need to be completed is its own rewarding little assignment. And I'm someone who's kind of always had a bit of a mixed experience with these types of mechanics, but I think the reason I really liked it here is that it's very simplified with the drive mechanic. Drives are basically quests, and they really narrow your focus. You just track whichever one you want to do, and the game will tell you where to go to achieve the next step. You can easily filter out the ones that aren't time sensitive with the ones that are, which makes the decision-making process a lot easier. The gameplay loop ends up being really solid and dangerously addictive. I got sucked into just seeing out one more cycle so many times just to see what exciting new development was around the corner. I also really love that the game has many different alternate endings, and many of which can be completed in the same run. They're these really monumental, powerful moments of punctuation in the game's story. Some will end your time prematurely, and others will allow you to continue peeling back further layers on Erland's Eye. And the best thing about playing this game today is that it does now include all 3 free DLC packs, bringing real closure and wrapping the story up with an appropriately epic conclusion that involves almost all the characters you meet throughout your time on the Eye. I will say that it does try to achieve something similar to the suicide mission at the end of Mass Effect 2, to mixed results. It doesn't really reflect that same level of consequence to your actions that Mass Effect did. And that kind of brings me to a recurring issue with the game. Player choice and consequence, the illusion of that is just not strong enough. You're able to see through it too easily. Dialogue choices feel meaningful, but you can peek behind the curtain relatively easily. I appreciate the many ways you can approach and achieve an objective, but it kind of feels like you do just circle back to the same result no matter what. Your dice or attributes don't ever really play into anything that happens in conversations as well, and that's really disappointing. I hate to say it, but even if the stakes felt high in the context of the story, mechanically they never reflected the same tension. Citizen Sleeper just doesn't punish you enough. It doesn't punish you for your actions or lack of, and it doesn't lock you out of enough. And I know that sounds weird, but that's actually the kind of stuff I look for in games like this. And it's one of the biggest reasons I love games like Disco and other CRPGs, because they're not afraid to make you suffer for your sins, Failing is half the fun. But here, Citizen Sleeper kind of feels like it's playing with kid gloves. It's not hard enough. The time it takes to do something in Citizen Sleeper and the time given to do that thing just have way too much margin for error. You can totally fuck things up and have more than enough time to still do everything you want to do. Then there's these perks that you get as well, like being able to use leftover dice at home to replenish energy, when for just a pitiful amount of credits, you can essentially achieve the same thing without any RNG coming into play at all. It's stuff like that that made me feel certain mechanics just weren't totally well thought out. And it meant the game got pretty easy towards the end. I never even got close to fully depleting my energy or condition at any point. Critical actions that have really grave ramifications if unsuccessful are just way too easy to overcome, with a simple 6 assuring your success every single time. And let me tell you, 6s are not hard to come by in this game. Even in Disco and other CRPGs, there's kind of always a chance of failure, no matter how slim, and it means that there's just always a little bit of anxiety behind every single decision you make. Here, there's just none of that, which is strange for a game, set on the backdrop of the random chaos of the cosmos. I think Citizen Sleeper desperately needed something like this, because if you plan correctly, it's practically impossible to achieve a fail state. The progression system is also shockingly efficient for an RPG. You get upgrade points to spend in the 5 core attributes, and increases will either grant you a specific perk, like the ability to see the potential outcomes of decisions, or add 1 or even 2 numbers onto your dice. There's just not enough meat on the bone here, though, to encourage unique playstyles or anything close to classes, which is weird because it allows you to choose one at the start, so it kind of just feels redundant in the end. The most basic way to improve your prospects is just to simply level up all attributes equally. That way, you're going to put 1 or 2 points into all of them and increase your rolls, and you'll easily be able to make all 5s and eventually 4s 6s, meaning you can overcome basically anything. There's a point where a character in the game tries to get you to commit to one task over the other, and then another character chimes in and says, well, I'm sure they can do both. And you know what? They're fucking right. You can. And too often, it just feels like I got to have my cake and eat it too. Now, I love cake. Love it. But after a while, I started to feel like Bruce Bogtrotter in Matilda. Yeah, I don't want to be able to do both. I want to have to commit to one thing or the other based on the kind of person I want my character to be. At some point, I want to be presented with an impossible choice and a decision that I torture myself over. By the end, though, you kind of are just all in on the story and how it all ends. And luckily, this is the part of the game that is more than engaging enough. It all starts with the setting and the world, which I just found myself so submerged in. The lore and the world building are world class. Every little tidbit that's exposited in this matter-of-fact way creates a universe that feels vibrantly animated. You'll uncover all sorts of information about the world's factions, gangs, corporations and unions, as well as rumours of immortality afforded to upper-class executives, clandestine operations to settle off-world utopias, and much more. The writing here, though, is where the game really sings, and this comes down to developer Gareth Damian Martin's work. He is the sole writer here, and that is incredibly impressive because his writing is colourful, it's evocative, it easily conjures up vivid imagery. You will have to do a fair bit of the work, but if you are willing, the game gives you more than enough kindling to fire up your imagination. It's descriptive, mature, immersive. There were some lines throughout my time that literally brought me to a standstill and still haunt me now. But it's also abstract and surreal, describing programming jargon and metaphysical concepts that can be hard to physically place and imagine, but anyone familiar with hard science fiction literature will know this as familiar ground. The payoff when you complete drives is emotionally significant and just always worth your time. I was so surprised at how many of these provided such deeply satisfying and cathartic resolution, with characters achieving meaningful conclusions to their arcs. And all of this is obviously so important because there isn't a whole lot of quote-unquote game here. You're going to mostly be navigating menus and screens and dialogue, everything set to a mostly nondescript background and a beautiful but static character image, but man, seriously, the writing here really just soars and brings the whole thing to life. Its themes and concepts pose incredibly complex questions, some of which don't really have answers, and let's be honest, those are the best kinds of questions, and Citizen Sleeper doesn't even pretend to have the answers either. There's ethical dilemmas, philosophical paradoxes, and irreconcilable programming loops. But the best thing about all the headiness here is that there's just as much heart as well. Citizen Sleeper is a game that will make you think, and it will make you feel, often at the same time. It's a deeply political game, make no mistake about that, so be aware of that, whether that's your thing or not, with its scathing takedowns of end-stage capitalism. But it's just as existential as well, touching on how our memories create continuity that makes you feel like you, and how alienating it is when that's taken away from you. And some of it just speaks to the universal human experience, how we all need somewhere to call home, and how we can find that anywhere if we simply find good enough people to share it with. And that brings me to the people, the characters that inhabit the world in this game, which are all so beautifully brought to life. There's no voice acting, which I do think is a real missed opportunity, a massive shame. I can only imagine how much that would elevate a title like this, but again, thankfully the writing and especially the dialogue is just so good that these characters still have more than a voice of their own. The dialogue is engaging and realistic. It's filled with all these great little subtleties, and the overall add-on effect of that is that conversation flows freely and resembles a real conversation. Each one of these characters has a heaping serve of personality and feels like a real, tangible person, despite inhabiting a galaxy far, far away. I love how so many of Citizen Sleeper's major players have this moral ambiguity about them as well. They don't fall neatly into binary categories of good and evil. Not only are the characters brought to life with this effortless dialogue, but the character design is just one of the standout things in this game. It has this awesome comic book look that's clearly inspired by the works of Mobius, with crisp line work, vibrant colours, intricate detail. I can't remember how much time I spent just kind of looking at these. It really reminded me of the similarly superb character art in Hades, like something ripped straight from your favourite graphic novel, which is no surprise when you realise the artist behind these portraits has been working in that field for years. A massive shout out to the artist here, Guillaume Singelin. You should definitely check out more of his stuff. I know I'm going to. I can't wait to fall down a rabbit hole of his works, and it is absolutely imperative that he returns for the sequel. This also brings us to another of the creative visionaries here in Citizen Sleeper, who rounds out the artistic pillars of this game, Amos Roddy, who is the composer and has created a soundtrack that is just fucking brilliant and so integral to the Citizen Sleeper experience. Perfectly matching the game's tone. It's dreamy, contemplative, and with all the precise loneliness of a life lived in the emptiness of space. It pounds home this cyberpunk setting with a heap of bassy synthwave and glitchy production. It's really unobtrusive as well. I like the way that it kind of drifts in and out, at times hypnotic and relaxing, others haunting and alien. As much as I did adore the soundtrack, I really could have done with just a couple more tracks. After almost 20 hours with the game, you are going to cycle through the playlist several times. Citizen Sleeper is a game I thoroughly enjoyed, despite my misgivings with some of the mechanical shallowness and the lack of depth in regards to the player choice and consequence and the undercooked RPG elements. Narratively, this game is one of the better games I have played. For now though, it's the Patient Gamer signing off, strongly recommending Citizen Sleeper as a game to get off your backlog if you are into narrative-driven experiences and you do appreciate an incredibly well thought out and well-written story. And of course, as always, if you have made it this far, you are a god among men, and I really do appreciate you sticking it out. And if you did enjoy this video and you're not subscribed already, then please consider doing so, and giving the video a like. Every little bit helps. But for now, thanks for watching.